Hey everyone, and welcome to this Season 15 Mordekaiser guide. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Federals, and I am a Challenger top lane player who used to play a lot of Mordekaiser in the past. I say used to because up until his newest skin, I didn't really play him that much. I still did, just way less than what I used to. But ever since he got the Sanuzal skin, I've decided to pick him back up again way more and play through a bunch of different matchups with him and see how he feels again. In this video, I'm gonna share my thoughts regarding Mordekaiser's kit, his early game, mid game, late game, itemization, summoner spells, runes, general playstyle, and even combos, because yes, Mordekaiser has some combos as well. They're definitely not as complex as other champions, but he does have some combos. Now, with all that being said, let's get started. First off, I'm going to quickly go over Mord's abilities in order, just in case there's people watching the video that are unfamiliar with his kit, and just as a general reminder of what Mordekaiser's abilities do in full. First off, there's his passive, which actually has two effects. The first one is that whenever Mordekaiser auto-attacks, he deals more damage based on his ability power. So the more ability power you buy, the more your next auto attack will deal. Now, the second part of the ability is that Mordekaiser gains a stack every time he damages an enemy champion or large monster with his auto attacks or damaging abilities. You can see that I generate these two lines underneath the health bar and the white bar, and once I have 3 of these, I will gain a bonus effect from the passive that will give me damage around myself and movement speed. If you don't deal damage after about 4 seconds, it will drop off, but if you continue to damage them with auto attacks or spells, the damage will stay. Keep in mind that the damage on the circle will not auto refresh by itself. So what that means is just because you're damaging someone with the circle effect, it does not mean the damage will stay the entire time. You have to keep auto attacking or using your spells. If you don't, it will go down. Then there's this Q. Pretty simple, just throw out his mace in a line that deals damage, and that's about it really. There is one thing that's worth noting here, and that is the fact that you can use your Q in conjunction with your flash, and I'll get to that specific interaction when I get to the combos, because they did a change to how this works, and the fact that if you hit only one target with your Q, it will take bonus damage. So in this case, you can see that I Q all of them and they take roughly 160 each. But if I Q this isolated target, it's going to be just the 224 on that isolated target. His W is pretty basic as well. It's just a shield when you activate it that will start to decay as it stays on you. It does have a secondary effect, which is that the shield can be reactivated, and Mordekaiser will heal for a percentage of the shield. If I were to have a larger shield here, and then I reactivate it, you can see that I heal from it. It's not a 1-to-1, even at max rank, so it's basically always better to not reactivate it unless the shield starts depleting and no one is hitting you. At which point it starts to become better, simply because if not, the shield is just going to go down anyway. The way you generate the shield is either by taking damage, which will generate a bit, or dealing damage. When you deal damage, you generate more of your shield, and taking damage generates you way less. The shield will actually deplete by itself, while the shield counter will deplete down to 5% of your health, and it will just stay there while it's off cooldown. If it's on cooldown, it just doesn't, and you have to fully regain it from the start. But if it's up, it's always going to be at the 5%, the minimum amount that it can stay at. It will never deplete below this. But in this case, I use Q here and it just starts depleting itself. This is also kind of an indirect, well, I guess not an indirect, but it's making it a lot easier for the opponents to know exactly when your W is up, because you will have this 5% here just sitting there if you are at that amount. If you have more, obviously, it's not going to be as noticeable, but for example, if you use your W and then you don't really attack, or you attack very briefly and not generate up to that point, it's going to deplete fully because it's on cooldown, but when it becomes off cooldown, you can see that it instantly jumps to that 5%. Then there's his E, just a basic pull, not much to it either. This can be used as an escape tool if you try to distance yourself from someone. So normally, you can pull someone towards you like this, but let's say you want to get away from this person. The way you do it is you just aim your cursor the other way and you will change the direction, and that way you can maybe escape to a turret, to a teammate, right? Pull them off of you. This is actually really important to do in a lot of different matchups that constantly want to jump on your head, where normally you just kind of want to stay back. For example, Renekton, if he dashes into you, you can pull him back with your E like this. Jax, if he jumps on you and wants the hard trade. Darius, if he pulls you, you can try to pull him off of you. The one thing to keep in mind though is that this is a very telegraphed ability, and there's a lot of cases where it can be very difficult to land, especially if you do it behind like this. And another thing to note is that depending on where you use your pull, you're going to hit the enemy faster or later. And what I mean by this is, you can see in this example, when I look to pull these two, this target will be pulled slightly later because the claw will be right up to this. So you can see here, that one gets pulled and then there's a small delay on the other one. This can be really good to know because it makes it to where if they're right on top of you and you want to leave them as little room to escape as possible, you can do a very short one that will instantly pull them off of you. Because if you were to, try to escape and you do like the maximum pull, where you do it like this, it leaves them more time to escape because it doesn't instantly go on to them. But if you do it closer like this, it will happen much faster. So that's like a small mechanic from Mordekaiser that he has. And this ability also grants passive Magic Pen. Not a whole lot, but it is a bit of extra Magic Pen that does help out. And then there's his ulti, his most known ability by far, even by non-Mordekaiser players. He point and clicks a enemy champion and sends them to the Death Realm. Now, while you're in this realm, you cannot escape it. You can prevent being taken in the first place, but you can no longer escape it. Before, there were abilities such as Gangplank W, Alistar Ultimate, Rengar Empower W, and others that would break you out of the realm, even the item Quicksilver Sash, which used to actually remove you entirely out of the Death Realm, but that's no longer the case. Once you enter the realm, you stay there, either until the ability duration is done, or one of you dies. When you get sent to the realm, Mordekaiser actually steals a lot of your stats as well, and it's 10% of your ability power, attack damage, attack speed, armor, magic resist, and max health. If you do not get sent, he will not steal anything, and the ability just doesn't happen. So if I were to put a spell shield on this target, and I use my ultimate on them, I just get nothing out of it. I completely waste my ulti. I don't do the steal, they don't get sent, nothing happens. But again, once you're actually inside the realm, there's nothing that can get you out of it. It's worth noting that it's 10% of the current stats from those. If someone were to have extra resists, like I can add 200 armor and 200 magic resist to this target dummy, if I were to use my ultimate, I will steal 20 armor and magic resist. But if, let's say, as we're fighting, the stats go down, it doesn't update to that. It's still going to be the flat 20. And this can actually happen in some matchups, such as Malphite, because his passive gives him more armor from W. His W passive makes it to where he gets more armor when his passive is up. So what that means is you can ult Malphite instantly when his passive is up, and then gain the increased stats. And then when his passive drops, his armor drops as well, but your armor steal does not change. This is also the case if Rammus is using his W and maybe has Aftershock on. You can ult him when he has those two and steal 10% of those stats. And then when his W and Aftershock drop, you're not going to drop the resist that you steal. And you also leave abilities within Summoner's Rift. Summoner's Rift and the Death Realm are two different planes, essentially. They're two different playing fields. So what that means is, let's say there's a Trundle and he uses his zone on Summoner's Rift. If you were to ulti him, he won't take the zone with him. So that can be seen as kind of a counter because you make it to where you fully negate his W. He doesn't get the attack speed, the move speed, the healing increase, it's all gone. The zone is completely removed. It will still stay on the Summoner's Rift, but it doesn't stay for the realm. This is also the case with stuff like pets. So if you ult a Yorick and he has Maiden out, and his ghouls, they just won't follow. If he puts his cage down, On Summoner's Rift, you can ult and you will instantly break out of it because you jump into the realm. This works for Alawi Tentacles. You can see here there's this plant. Once I ult, it's gone. This works for wards as well. So if I were to place down a ward in the realm, it is going to stay in the realm. And that's it. It's done. Right, if I ult again, it's still gonna be there. I place a ward here, so now I have vision. But once the realm is done, it's just gonna disappear and I lose the vision. So that's like just in general good to know, because this can save your life knowing these small interactions. There's a lot of matchups like Alawi or Yorick where you can just steal away a lot of their damage source. Yorick Ghouls, which again stay in Summoner's Rift, or Alawi Tentacles. There's also abilities that will prevent this. If they're like straight up CC immune, like an Olaf ultimate, or if they time certain abilities well that have displacement immunity on them. And some of these abilities would be stuff like Set ultimate, Volibear ultimate, Warwick Q and ultimate, and there's a few more, but those are just some of them. And most of these you can see from the champion pool, they are actually top laners. Yeah, maybe you'll find like Warwick jungle or Volibear jungle, but you will meet them in top lane at some point as well. The final thing to note here is that if Mordekaiser actually succeeds in killing the target within the death realm before the timer runs out, you will keep the 10% stats. So let's say you steal 10% of their health, you will just keep them until they're back up. So if their respawn timer is 40 seconds, you're gonna keep 10% of their attack speed, 10% of their health, 10% of their armor, MR, that will be kept until they respawn. There's also kind of a unique interaction with how you steal attack damage, in the sense that, yes, you steal 10% of the total AD, but it is subtracted from the base attack damage from the target you steal it from. So for example, in this case, if I were to add some damage to the target dummy, let's say I put this BF sword on the target dummy, and then I were to steal, you can see that its base damage is 0, but if I steal, now it's going to be -4, because I stole 10%, which was 4, so now it's going to be -4. I've now also added a bunch of BF swords to this Darius, and you can see his base damage is 64. And when I go to steal, it's going to drop down to 30. Why is this important? Well, an item like Sheen works off of base damage. So what this essentially means is that if I were to use my ultimate on a target that has a Sheen, you can see that the damage of the Sheen goes from 128 to 61. In this case, it's the full Trinity Force, but it's the same with the Sheen, right? So you can use this to your advantage against a champion like Darius if he buys Trinity Force, or against a Nasus where he's basically always going to get a Sheen, which will allow you to take away not only damage, but Sheen damage. It's not that common to encounter this type of interaction, but it can work very well. Again, against Darius if he goes Trinity Force, against Nasus, against Wukong, right? There's matchups where you'll face the opponent and they'll have a Sheen item. And this also works with an item like Sundered Sky, right? Sundered Sky works off of base damage. So if I were to just give this Darius a Sundered Sky instead of what he has now, and I were to just copy the inventory, you can see that it heals him 64, but if I were to actually use my ultimate on him, it will go to 53. So you can have that healing reduced as well. So there's some specific items that you can kind of counter a little bit if you know about this specific interaction. Before jumping into the actual game stages, I'd like to showcase everything else. So we're gonna start with the runes, summoner spells, then items, combos, and then lastly the explanation for each game stage. So that would be the early, mid, and late game. So first off, the runes. This is the most common Mordekaiser page that I run right now. Like by far, this is the most common one that I run. It may seem weird, especially on the secondary, because you have approach velocity, which Mordekaiser can't really use it. I mean, you would need an actual movement impairing ability to apply this, but the reason I run it is because I specifically take this whenever I look to rush Rylai's Crystal Scepter, because the slow will keep reapplying itself with your passive. So then you're actually just going to have a permanent 15% movement speed boost whenever you chase someone down if you have Rylai and your passive up. On top of that, the 2% extra move speed here actually makes a pretty solid difference. Mordekaiser has one of the lower speed stats of bruisers, that being 335. Normally it's 340, but this 2% actually makes it go all the way up to 342. And if you combine it with the move speed from magical footwear, once you hit these boots that you get for free, you're actually going to have close to 380 movement speed without spending any money on actual speed. And then if you combine it with approach velocity, you're then going to get even more speed. You can also change Legend Haste if you want to Legend Alacrity. Sometimes it's pretty good to have the attack speed instead of the haste. And here, usually I take Cut Down into tankier targets in lane when I know they might rush Kanik Rookern, because that gives it that shield that keeps regenerating. So that way you get more value out of Cut Down. Or maybe champions who will heal up a lot above the 60%, maybe Nasus with his passive lifesteal. And you can take Ku. The only matchup, though, that I actually take Ku into right now would be Warwick, because, well, he's most likely going to be under half most of the time. But that's about it. As for your secondaries, you can change them around. Another page that I actually like to run for Mordekaiser would be this one. This one would be more ability haste focused. And on this one, I don't actually rush Rylai. If I take this page, I go maybe for Cosmic Drive or Hextech Rocket Belt or another item, not necessarily Rylai because I don't have approach. And you will get a ton of haste from this. This setup is very haste focused, and it works really well into some specific matchups where you want a lot of haste. You can also change these around as well. This is another rune page that I tend to run into some very specific matchups as well, where you just need a lot of move speed. You can also run Phase Rush. This one specifically, I run into Olaf. You can do it in some other matchups as well, but I found it to be really good into Olaf. Phase Rush is super underrated on Mordekaiser in my opinion. This is another rune page that I like to run on Mordekaiser. Again, matchup specific with Lethal Tempo. There's some cases where I think it's not that bad of a rune. The best example that I can think of right now where I actually run Lethal Tempo is Irelia, where I just walk up to her and auto attack her and force her to Q, so that way I can guarantee my Q, because normally when you try to Q, she Qs over you and then that's that. But with this, you kind of force her to Q to be able to 1v1 you. But you should look to adapt your rune pages to the game at hand and see what you like. You know, Resolve is pretty standard as well. You could run Conditioning for scaling with like Overgrowth or Revitalize. It affects both your W shield and the W heal. Bone Plating for some specific matchups that are pretty aggressive in the early game, right? Maybe combo based ones like Renekton, maybe Riven. Second Wind just for like general sustain. Shield Bash, actually quite underrated for Mord. I've been playing around with it more and I kinda like it in some specific ones where you pop W and people don't expect the damage. You can even run Domination, though personally I don't really run it. Ultimate Hunter is really good for Mordekaiser. It's just that you don't really have a second thing that you want here. Like you could probably run Taste of Blood or maybe Cheap Shot, but it's probably like just this if you're running Domination. Just experiment with it. My personal favorite page that I found has to be by far this one, and I only run it when I rush Rylai, but it feels so good. For summoner spells, you actually have a pretty good variety on Mordekaiser. Most of the time I tend to run Flash Ignite, like 90% of the time. Basically 99% of the time, or like 98% of the time, you take Flash and something else. You can run Flash Teleport, Flash Ghost. Flash Ghost specifically is more matchup dependent. Flash Teleport is just kind of the default one. You can also run Ghost Teleport, which is like also fine, but more matchup dependent. You can run even Flash Exhaust, which seems really weird, but there are matchups where I think this is good because the burst of the champion is so disgustingly high and you need that exhaust. One of the examples here would be Tryndamere, where I've tried everything. I've tried Teleport, I've tried Ghost, Ignite, and Exhaust, and out of all of those, Exhaust felt the best. I usually run Flash Exhaust into Tryndamere, but there could be other matchups, right? You could maybe run it into a Riven as well, and that's another one where I tend to run it. It all depends on matchup. Experiment and see what you like. Now with the runes and summoner spells done, I'm gonna hop into game and talk about the items and item choices, as well as some 2-3 item spikes and maybe some full builds. So starter item wise, you either have Doran's Ring, or Doran's Shield. Most of the time, I like to go Doran's Ring because it gives you that AP and that ability to fight way more early on, plus 2 potions instead of the 1. Doran's Shield is really good against poke, so stuff like Kennen, Quinn, Aurora, you know, ranged champions where you don't really get to fight them, that's good. But if you're in a situation where you just fight the enemy, like maybe it's a Darius, you take Doran's Ring instead, and you fight them out in melee. Most of the time, though, you just want to go Doran's Ring. In my opinion, most of the time, Doran's Ring is the take. And, like, Doran's Shield is specifically just for matchups where you literally need super sustain to survive. Like, again, Kennen, Quinn, you know, poke-type champions where you don't get anything off of the Doran's Ring. Your first big spike in lane will be Rylai's. If you are running the approach velocity and magical footwear setup. By the time you get your Rylai, you should have your magical footwear kick in. So right now I have 377 movement speed, and I didn't spend any gold on it. Having this Rylai spike will swing so many lanes in your favor. You can see the speed, how much I gained from approach. 50 extra movement speed. I gain 50 movement speed more. If I were to also have something like Boots of Swiftness, I'm gonna end up having a total of 480 move speed plus the slow resist. Like, that's a lot. Plus the opponent is also slowed down. So this is a huge power spike, and there are lanes where once you get Rylai, you fully swing them, and the 1v1 becomes so much easier. For example, if Darius pulls you in, and you can tag him with Rylai, unless he ghosts instantly to run away and has Boots of Swiftness himself, he will not be able to Q you, because you'll just force him to be in your melee range all the time. He's not going to be able to space you out. He will have to pull into Q, and if he starts with his pull, well, then he can't really. I'm actually going to put on the screen right now a clip of a matchup that I think is pretty bad for Mordekaiser up until you get Rylai. Once you get Rylai, the matchup swings. In this case, I'm talking about Ryze. You can see here that he procced Phase Rush to try to run away, and I kept up with his Phase Rush. He wasn't able to escape me through Phase Rush. So he had the slow resist from Phase Rush and the extra speed, and I was able to keep up with him because of all of the extra speed I gained. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that he gains even more speed because he already has a built-in speed mechanic that he used there. He did EW into Q, and when you do that combo, you gain speed, right? If you do 2 spells that aren't Q and then follow it up with the Q, you get speed. There's a bunch of matchups like that where once you hit your Rylai, you just swing fights and you're able to keep up with them. Another one would be Vladimir, but in that case, you kind of need to delay the Rylai for some other components first. For example, specifically for Vladimir, I won't just straight up rush Rylai because I feel like if I do, he can bully me in lane depending on his setup. For example, a lot of people like to do Summon Airy with Ignite Vladimir and then look for kill pressure. And against that, what I normally like to do is buy a Negatron Cloak, maybe Oblivion Orb, and then go for Rylai, right? So itemizing correctly and buying the correct components is also crucial. Sure, it delays your Rylai spike, but at least this way, you have the resists early on to not die, because as you build towards your Rylai, if you were to just brute force the Rylais, he would straight up kill you with that setup. If he has something like, let's say, Ghost with Phase Rush, then you can skip the Negatron Cloak and just go for the Rylai. Maybe even skip the Oblivion Orb. Most of the time though, if he has a hyper kill setup, you need Negatron into Oblivion Orb into Rylai. If it's not super kill focused, maybe it's like Conqueror, Ghost, Phase Rush Ghost, you can go Oblivion Orb Rylai. Even though you have to delay it and it's such a big spike once you gain it, sometimes you just need to. If you're looking for a different item spike on your first item, right, maybe you don't get Rylai, there's options such as Riftmaker, which is pretty good depending on matchup. The Omnivamp especially is super underrated on this item, and it can make a world of difference in the 1v1, way more noticeable than you'd think. Obviously the damage amp also helps out a lot, but the main thing that I want to again highlight here is the Omnivamp. Very, very underrated, but very good, especially when you combine it with Conqueror. Another good power spike could be Liandry into tanks. If there is a target with a lot of tankiness, let's say by this point it's someone who has a lot of magic resist, maybe a lot of health, just fighting them in melee can hyper burn them. Now there's matchups where you can just rush Rylai even if they're a tank, simply because you can keep up with them. But let's say you're fighting a Cassante. That's one matchup where I don't like to rush Rylai because I feel like I really need the burn damage on my first item to do well. So instead I just get Liandry, have that 2% max health burn, and deal with the tank much better than I would with Rylai. Obviously it's a bit more expensive, but it's a very good spike once you hit it. Another one, when you go into your more ability haste focus setup, would be Cosmic Drive. If I were to have the maximum ability haste here, I wouldn't have 25. I would get 10 more from Transcendence, and then the 8 from the runes, because in this case I took the damage instead of the 8 ability haste. That being said though, don't tunnel vision just on your first item. Make sure you itemize components if you need to. Like, sometimes you just need to delay this. Maybe you're against an Aatrox, so you buy Oblivion Orb or Bramble Vest. You're against Fiora, same thing. Maybe you buy Oblivion or Bramble Vest, right? Maybe you need some magic resist for your lane, like a Negatron Cloak, or just sitting on a null magic mantle. If it's like low damage, like let's say you're against a Malphite who maxes Q and tries to poke you out, just buy a null magic mantle and sit on it, and you just kind of negate his poke altogether. You also quickly go through all of your boots choices that you have. In my opinion, you can buy Sorks in some specific matchups. Mercs, you buy these against heavy CC comps, not much else to it. Plated steel caps, very good against physical damage and especially auto attack based characters. Swiftness boots, just overall good boots. They give you very good speed and slow resist. And then Ionian boots. They go really well in heavy haste focused setups. I really like Ionian boots if I were to do a build like Ionian Boots of Lucidity, Cosmic Drive, and Hextech Rocket build. This is a core that I really like that will end up giving you a very good amount of haste. Your ulti right now is 80 seconds. Now for 2 item spikes, again, this is a pretty good one. If you want to have extremely hard stick potential, you can do this one. This is another very good 2 core that will give you some extreme stick potential because Cosmic Drive gives you 4% move speed and then another 20 whenever you damage someone. You can run a setup like this, where this allows you to play into a lot of different tanks with both health and magic resist, and it's extremely good at making sure that you shred them down faster because you're able to slowly chip away at them with the magic resist shred from Bloodletters on top of your Liandry % health damage and your passive, which also deals % health damage. You won't have Rylai to keep up, but you can buy it afterwards if you really wanna. Generally speaking though, if you're fighting something like maybe an Ornn with Kaenic, you get Liandry Bloodletters and it's really good at just allowing you to shred down his magic resist, maybe ulting him, right? Dealing way more damage per second than you would expect, right? This doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it adds up very quickly. Hextech Rocket build can fit into a variety of builds as well, simply because it has that dash. You can extend your ultimate range essentially by dashing and then using your ulti. You do like a mini extension of it. It's really good at catching people off guard that play on the very edge of your ulti range. So you just rocket belt in and then ulti and you catch them off guard. Another thing that Hextech Rocket Belt helps you out with is if the opponent has a spell shield. Because normally if you try to ult someone while they have a spell shield, you can't. But if you use your Rocket Belt, the rocket damage will proc down the spell shield, so then you can ultimate them. Another synergy with Rocket Belt is the fact that if you have Rylai, the rockets themselves will proc the slow on Rylai, allowing you to get the movement speed from approach velocity if you have it that way as well from farther. There are some more situational items as well that you can buy defensive wise, right? If you're looking for armor, you have the options of Thornmail or, you know, something like Dead Man's Plate for the slow resist. Very underrated item, but pretty good. Ronduin against crit. Zhonya's obviously good item with the stasis. Gives you a lot of time just by using the stasis. You buy some time. Jackshow, just really strong on resists. Amps up any armor and MR that you end up buying. If you're looking for magic resist, Spirit Visage is very good because it amplifies both your W shield and your W heal, so that means it does like a mega amplifier, in the sense that if you were to hit someone and you get that shield, the Visage will increase this shield, which will then increase the healing, and then the healing itself will also be increased, if that makes sense. It's like a mega dip from it. That being said, there is a better magic resist item against heavy magic damage, which is Kaenic Rookern. In my opinion, this is the strongest magic resist item in the game. It is 80 flat magic resist with a Galio passive. You can also buy maybe Abyssal Mask, though It's not really as good anymore on Mordekaiser. You can if you really wanna. You can also buy Force of Nature, but this is more if you need movement speed or if you're playing against certain dot characters, like maybe you're fighting against something like a Brand, Zyra, maybe even Cassiopeia, you know, people who dot you all the time. There's quite a number of combinations and builds that you can do on Mordekaiser if you want to. This is a really strong 3-core that I like to go for and that I kind of dabble with a lot. You can replace your Rift Maker, for example, for Bloodletters, and then you have the Magic Resist Shred, and it's pretty good. You can maybe have a full build that looks something like this. This is a very strong full build that I also like for him. Not bad at all. You have armor, magic resist, the stasis from Zhonya's is really good, and you have stick potential as well as good damage. Right, just kind of an all-around build that's solid. You can go for heavy haste, so you can buy something like this, which isn't going to be fully cooldown reduction based, but it will give you a lot of cooldown reduction. Like, this is 25 with a 15 and another 15 plus the boots. And then if you adjust your runes, you'd have even more. Also makes you pretty tanky. It just has a different spike to it in the sense that you have a lower ult cooldown, your abilities are lower, maybe you can get more spell rotations in a fight. You have the pick potential of Rocket Belt. I also have a written guide on Mobifier where there is a section specifically dedicated to me explaining every single item that you can go for on Mordekaiser. Like, it says the item name and then the explanation as to when and why I take that specific item. On top of that, on the guide itself, there is also a link to a matchup spreadsheet where you will be able to see every single champion matchup in the entire game. I've placed everything over there on that matchup spreadsheet. I've done stuff like Mordekaiser versus Anivia, Azir, even off-meta stuff like Ivern, Janna. Every character is on there with their own pointers and tips and tricks, as well as the way you want to build against them, the matchup difficulty, it's all over there. If you're curious about it, I will put a link in the description to the guide, and once you access the guide, if you want to go to the matchup spreadsheet, you can look at its specific dedicated section where the link to the matchup spreadsheet is. You can click it and you can see it for free. It doesn't cost anything, just click on it and it'll take you over there. Mordekaiser doesn't exactly have some insane combos, right? I mean, it's Mordekaiser, for crying out loud. But it's just some, like, basic trading combos, and then, like, his Q Flash, which, again, got changed, as I've mentioned before, and I'll showcase how when I get to the Q Flash in this section. So the first combo, that's usually gonna be, like, just your standard trade pattern. If you want to just pull someone in, you do E into Q auto, right? Very standard, very basic. That's the most basic lane trade pattern you have out there. You just E, Q into auto, and that's the combo, right? There's the other variation where you can start with your Q into E auto, right? And this is like another one that can be done. That's another lane trade one where you don't have to start with your pull. If you're a bit closer, you can Q first and then pull into auto attack. This is especially good to do if you have Rylai, because tagging them with Q is easier than your pull. So then you can tag them with the Q, get the Rylai slow, and then the pull would be easier to land. Another combo regarding his ultimate in this case would be just the standard E plus ulti. Mordekaiser's ult actually slows down the opponent when he uses his ultimate, like during the windup. So what that means is you can use your E into ulti, and you can see there it showed for a very brief second that he was slowed down, meaning it could be an easier way to guarantee the pull as you go for the ultimate. And then there's the ultimate flash, which is very situational, but it can be good in some cases. The way Mordekaiser ult works in terms of the circle itself is that the way Mordekaiser gains his circle in the Death Realm depends on where you are standing as opposed to the enemy. So in this situation, if I'm standing here and the enemy is here, if I ult this person, the circle will be higher on this end. So if I do this, they're gonna have more wiggle room here. But in this situation, this is my turret, right? And this is the enemy side, so they would have an easier time escaping me. So if I were to stand opposite to them, if I were to be on this side, then it would mean that the circle would be smaller on this end, and they would have a lot of room here, but that wouldn't really help them because they don't want to walk back into my side. So this is where the ult flash can help, where you flash in the middle of the ultimate animation, and that way you get the circle to be smaller here. You can also just try to walk behind them or pull them, but if that's not possible, you can do the ultimate flash and reposition where your circle is at. And it can help out a lot because you give such little space for them to walk here that they're basically forced to go back or just sit in your face and try to 1v1 you in the melee. And then there's the Q flash. If you do the Q flash forward, it is the exact same. You do the standard Q flash, that is perfectly fine. Now, the way it's changed is that normally, if you want to, let's say, hit this person and you do a Q flash like this, you no longer hit them, you jump over them. Normally what would happen is you would actually hit them. And this is a pretty recent change that happened. And a lot of people still need to get used to this. So the way you're actually supposed to do it, if you want to Q flash now and reposition it, is very slightly flash in front over here, like right over here, so that you are able to just turn your character model in that direction instead of your full body. So if you do it like this, it's very janky, and personally I don't like it, but it is the way to go now. So if you want to do something like Q flash onto the side, right, you no longer do it like this because you're gonna miss it since you would be, angling the Q wrong. You have to literally put your cursor on top of their model for that to work. This does also mean you can angle your Q from here like this and flash on top of them, and they might not expect it. Let's say there's minions here, right? Let's say these are minions and he's expecting you to just Q them. You can then turn and flash it, and he will see that you are aiming your Q in this direction. And because it is a mechanic that got changed pretty recently, they might not be aware that you can actually even do this and actually reach them like this. Before, it didn't work like this, but Riot decided to change it, so that's how you're supposed to Q flash now. Mordekaiser's early game is actually not as great as you'd expect. There's a ton of matchups where your only real play is to sit far back and just use your Q from maximum range to poke down the enemy. Your actual Q range is pretty long, so you can do that somewhat reliably, and you don't want to let people get on top of you. If you're facing something like a Trundle, Olaf, Volibear, you don't want to let them get close to you because they will just straight up win the short trade every time. So your best play is to always Q them from max range. You also want to just fight them only when your W is up and if it's a good enough shield. If it's around half, you should look for a fight, but anything less than that can be pretty bad. You can also win the war of attrition if you slowly build up your health pool during the lane by using your W for the regeneration while out of combat. If you're in a winning position though, and let's say you fight someone with a weaker early game, you can use your pool to extend fights and look to continue fighting them instead of using it to push them off of you. So for example, if a Jax jumps on you and he has no counter strike, you can pull him into you as opposed to away from you so you can continue the fight. Once you hit 6 though, you actually get a pretty good spike due to your ultimate. The stat steal is really strong, way stronger than you'd expect. On top of that, the limited space means that the opponents can't really space you out as well. So if it's a ranged character that relies on hyper poking you, if you can kill them within the 7 seconds, that's great. Or even just hard chunk them. You don't have to get a kill out of it. If they are left at like 10% health, 15% health, that can force them to back out. Generally speaking though, all you want to do is farm up until you get your first item. You can fight before that as well if you find windows, but most of the time, if you commit your pool, you're probably gonna have to fight that champion, unless it's a max range pool into a max range Q hit. That's the only time where you don't really commit. But let's say you pull a Darius in, yeah, you're gonna have to fight that, right? So you'd never want to start with your pool. You just want to Q, and then when he uses his own pool, then you want to push him off of you because you're gonna lose the melee fight. Even at 6 with the stat steal, if he dodges a Q, you're probably gonna lose the fight. So generally speaking, once you get your completed item, your first one, you want to start fighting. And depending on that first item, you will have a different fight pattern. If you get Rylai's, you just stick on top of your opponent and don't let them escape you or kite you. You just stay on top of their face and you fight them out. Someone like Ornn straight up won't be able to escape you unless he has phase rush. Same for Darius, he won't be able to Q you unless he uses his spool specifically to land his Q. If not, you're good to go. The Rylai spike is so massive that there's lanes that are completely unplayable before it, and once you get it, it fully swings because you're actually able to keep up with them. Vlad is another one where normally if you try to extend the fight, he'll just use his W to run away. But if you have Rylai, even if he uses W, you're just gonna stick on top of him with the slow it gives, plus the combination of approach velocity, and if you have magical footwear kicked in, means that escape is basically not going to happen. If you're running a higher haste setup, then your first spike item is probably going to be Cosmic Drive instead, which gives you a lot of speed because of the effect, as well as the ability haste, which is really good in certain matchups where you really just want to cycle your spell cooldowns. You might sometimes need to delay that first item for item components, but generally speaking, there are item components that make you able to take more fights than you would normally. For example, if you have a Bramble Vest against Fiora, it allows you to fight her more as opposed to just rushing the Rylai. Sure, it delays the Rylai spike, but then you're actually able to put up a bit more pressure in the lane. Maybe even look for a kill angle if she oversteps. The big thing to keep in mind is that your ultimate is a very, very powerful tool if used correctly. It also allows you to just swing ganks from a 2v1 because you just straight up ult one of them and then turn the 2v1 into a 1v1. So you can maybe turn that fight around, either double killing one person, or just making it a 1-for-1. Honestly, I think I am exaggerating it just a little bit about how weak Mordekaiser's early game is. It's more so about his first 8 levels, and then you're kind of okay. You can keep, poking out with Q, and that's good to go. You have good damage, but it's usually the very first levels. Again, around level 8 is when you can start to actually have a bit more agency in the lane. But until then, try not to fight if your ulti is down. If it's up, go for it. The mid game will probably be your strongest point as Mordekaiser, where you have around 2 to 3 items and you can actually put up a lot of pressure on the map. Anytime your ulti is up, you can usually side lane kind of reliably due to the fact that you can just take one and kill them and then maybe swing the 2v1 or 3v1 that could be happening. That being said, try not to play without your ultimate. If your ulti is down, don't look for plays. It's usually not worth it, especially in team fights. If you can get a pull, that's good, and if you're super fed, obviously go for it. But if not, you want to play around your ulti cooldown. It is also really important to know who you want to ult. Do you want to isolate the support and then kill them? Is it a high priority support like a Soraka or a Lulu? Is it the carry? Can you 1v1 that carry? If it's someone like a Fed Vayne, can you really kill her? Or does she just dash all over the place and then dodge out your Q and E and then you get beaten? You have to really understand who you want to ultimate in the mid game. And it's kind of the same for the late game. Mordekaiser's late game is actually not that terrible. The issue is that if you compare him to something like a Fiora or a Camille, Kayle, these hyperscalers, he doesn't really have the strength necessary to kind of take over the game at that point. He's a juggernaut, but he doesn't have a reset like a Darius ulti or a mega true damage nuke like Set W, so most of your strength comes from the way you use your ultimate. On side lane, you can match these split pushers for the most part unless they take Hullbreaker, then it's gonna be really difficult in some cases. If not, you can just clear wave and make it hard for them to advance onto the turret. But you can go to team fights and generally be more useful because you can select one of the opponents to take into the realm. The only issue is that at that point, if you select a hyper carry, they will usually kill you before you hit them once. Take a champion like Vayne, you're never going to hit her a single time and she will just dance around you in the realm. Another one would be someone like Kayle, where she can just straight up ult and murder you in melee if you don't have like Zhonya's and Kanik and you just die instantly. That being said, you can isolate people like the support, for example. Let's say they have a Soraka who mega heals, you just ult her. Or you can even hyper CC those hyper carries. Mordekaiser's ulti is basically a 7-second crowd control if you think about it, if neither one dies. You're just CCing that person for 7 seconds. They're basically in a Zhonya's like state for 7 seconds. Both of you are kinda, as long as you don't hit each other, of course. So what that means is, if you're, let's say, over a wall and you just ult someone and you know they're gonna win the 1v1 but they can't actually hit you, you're basically buying time for your team. You're taking yourself out from the team fight, making it a 4v4, but if you're not the fed person on your team and you take away the fed person on theirs, it means that your team should in theory win the 4v4. Or again, if you can look for something like ulting away the Viego so he doesn't get a reset, maybe ulting out the Katarina so that she doesn't get the reset either. Maybe a Samira finds a really good angle so you ult her. That's usually the usefulness of Mordekaiser in the late game. It's not gonna be him murdering people on side lane, unless it's like some other juggernauts that aren't hyperscalers themselves. So maybe like a Nasus, an Alawi, right? But if it's someone like Fiora, yeah, she pops her ulti on you, you're basically dead because you have no way to dodge out her vital damage. And in the super late game, your build will dictate heavily as to how you play the game. For example, if you have a very ability haste focused setup, maybe you just want to ult someone to get a pick constantly. Like if your ulti is 50 seconds, just ult, and before they come back, you can ult someone again, right? If you're like kind of strong and in that late game position, you can just ulti someone out if your team is around you, and then just wait out the 7 seconds, even though you don't kill them in it, because your team will just gang up on them as you exit the realm. If you have a more shred focused build, like Liandry's with bloodletters, maybe you just sit in the front lines and apply that to maybe the Cassante or the Ornn or their support if it's a tankier one. You melt down their front line. Your build will heavily dictate the way you play. And one more important note is that if the enemy team has shield cut or shield breaking, you have to play team fights extremely carefully, because if they have a Serpent's Fang and you press W and it's only half the strength that it's supposed to be, you're gonna get melted way quicker than you'd think. Or if it's something like a Renekton Empower W or a Rel Q or a Blitzcrank ult, which just nukes your shield instantly, you kinda have nothing to fall back on, outside of maybe having Zhonya's. But with all that being said, we have reached the end of the video. I want to thank you guys for joining me on this very long video. It took me a while to make and to edit. I hope you found some of these things useful. I really tried to put in a lot of information. I also have the written guide on Mobile Fire if you want to check that out. Again, the link will be in the description. Maybe you find something else within the guide itself that you find interesting. And I want to hear your thoughts about what you thought of this video. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What were your thoughts on it? Because I really tried to give out all of the insight that I knew about the champion in a cohesive manner. If you want to ask me questions directly, you can catch me streaming at twitch.tv/federals123 if you ever want to hop in, maybe chat, ask some general questions, not even Mordekaiser related, just like in general, you know. You can go there, and with all that being said, thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you on the next video, hopefully very soon.
Favored by the gods and awaited in the Hall of Bones.